Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode one of the Broad Reach podcast. Um, this is a podcast that's mostly about sailing, and for this episode and the next few episodes, we're going to be covering the Golden Globe race, the GGR 2022, which is a non-stop round the world solo sailing race, which is a retro race. It's based on the 1960s Sunday Times race that was won by Robin Knox Johnson. So myself, Shane Power, and my buddy Sean here, Sean McHugh, who's an experienced sailor, and I'm not an experienced sailor, but we're both big fans of the GGR, and this is our podcast, and you're very welcome. So this is episode one. So over to you, Sean.
Yeah, I think what we'd like to do, maybe just to give it a bit of context as to what this race is and why we're into this, how did it come about, and what a little bit about the history, particularly for people who don't know what this race is that we're following. So I might start by going back a little bit and going back to 1966, which is 2 years before the original race, which is 1968. But in 1966, Francis Chichester completed the fastest solo around the world race with one stop. He needed to stop in, I think it was Australia, for repairs. So kind of the last remaining feat was for someone to sail solo around the world non-stop. And Robin Knox Johnson had his eyes set on this goal. He had a boat built for it called Suhaili, which has become part of legend at this stage. And there were some ideas. The Sunday Times was a sponsor for Francis Chichester when he did his race. Knox Johnson approached them and asked for sponsorship, but I don't think they had faith in him or his boat. But eventually the idea of a race came about, and it was called the Sunday Times Golden Globe race. They sponsored it. It happened in 1968. 9 people started off, 1 finished it. And
Wow.
That person was Sir Robin Knox Johnson, who won it ultimately. A couple of notable people, in particular, Bernard Moitessier. Shane, you talked about him before. I know you're a big fan, and you have his book, The Long Way.
A long way, yeah.
Donald Crowhurst, that story, of course, is a very tragic story. He died on the race. And we'll come back to that in another episode and discuss the original race. But that essentially was the original Golden Globe race. It's a legendary race. 4 years ago, then, there was the 50th anniversary of that race. And it was run by essentially Don McIntyre, who originally wanted to take part in the race, but then he ended up sort of coordinating it and didn't, because of the workload involved, couldn't actually take part in the race itself. I think one of his fellow competitors ended up sailing the boat that he actually had planned to sail in. So that happened 4 years ago. We weren't involved with that, Shane. We didn't follow that. But this time we have, and we've been following it from quite early on. And this is, I think, the 3rd version of it. So maybe you just want to give a little bit of a history as to what's happened this time around, how many people started, etc.
Yeah, so this is the 3rd version of the GGR. And as Sean was saying, it's organized by Don McIntyre, he's a legend himself, circumnavigator. He was in the Bach race, the BOC race in the late 80s. And he's got a massive experience in around the world sailing, going to Antarctica and everything. He's a legend. But we'll be talking about Don a lot, obviously, as we talk about the GGR. But just getting to the skippers. So the GGR 2022, 16 skippers started out basically on the 4th of September, and of those 16, 8 have retired, and just one skipper is on his way to retiring, unfortunately now. That's Elliot Smith. So that leaves a total of 7 skippers on and one of those skippers is in what we call Chichester class, which one of the rules that Don has stipulated is if you stop, you're not allowed, obviously, stop and repair your boat. Well, you are allowed to stop and repair your boat under certain conditions, but if you stop and get off the boat, you're basically in Chichester class. I think if you break the seal as well on your GPS tracker, there's a GPS device on the boat. I think they're the two stipulations, but you become what's called Chichester class, and that refers to what Sean was saying earlier about Chichester. He was the original circumnavigator. But if you're in Chichester class, you can't win the GGR, but you can still complete the race. But you have to get to Hobart before the 31st of January. So that's what Guy Waits is trying to do at the moment, and he's unfortunately not going to succeed. But he's while we're on the subject, he's sailed incredibly fast in the last week. But we'll get to that when we look at the tracker in a while. But I think we're going to look at the skippers who've retired now. So I'll just pass it back to you there, Sean.
Yeah, I've just seen this updated chain. Can you see this here? The screen with all the skippers. Yeah. Guy has been updated to Chichester. It's actually I love that term, and I love how Don has introduced that. It's kind of a nice nod back to, as you said, Francis Chichester. And Guy, as we know, stopped in Cape Town. He had a lot of barnacles on his boat, and it was really slowing him down. So he stopped in Cape Town, which means, as you said, he's no longer a competitor in the GGR, but he's now in what's called Chichester class. I wonder if another person fell into Chichester class, would they then have a first and second place? I'm guessing they probably would.
I think that's the idea, for sure, because okay. I think it says it somewhere in the statistics, either on the GGR site or the tracker. I think it showed his position as 8th overall, first in Chichester class. I think it said that on the tracker, so that's definitely the idea. But he is the only one at the moment, and he's going to have to retire when he arrives at Hobart. But he's clocked the third fastest, the third most nautical miles completed in 24 hours. He did that in the last few days. That's third behind Abalash and Kirsten, I think, two of the other skippers.
And the reason, Shane, that he needs to pull out is because he can't make Hobart in time, and it's a safety issue, right? There's a rule in the race that he needs to hit Hobart by the 31st of January. If not, it means he won't get to Cape Horn by a certain time in March, and the weather would be too bad, right?
Exactly, yeah. That's just to do with the weather and the time of year. Don put that in because he doesn't want people going around Cape Horn at that time, and so he's racing at the moment to try and get over there, but it's going to be a little bit. It's just going to take too long for him, unfortunately.
Just before I get into the skippers here, Shane, can you just tell everybody a little bit about the technology? What's different about this race versus modern sailing, or what are the similarities, I should say, between this and the 1968 race is maybe a better question.
Yeah, so like the big attraction with this race is it's a retro race, and they're using pre-1968 technology, so they're not allowed. They have to find their positions using a sextant, and you're not allowed to use satellite nav. So it's incredibly difficult. Like you're using old technology, and it's a real shout out to the old race. And I think that's why Robin Knox Johnson was loving the idea when Don brought it in 2018. So it's a real battle. It's a race of attrition. It's been called. Like there is. In the 2018 race, there was a lot of guys knocked out, and I think only 5 or 6 of them finished it. But it is a real race of attrition. It's a race of endurance, and it takes a lot of mental fortitude, which you and I have talked about in the past, and that's one of the attractions to the race. You know, it attracts very interesting characters. It's been called the Voyage of Madmen. You know, it's been termed that. But yeah, the technology, that's definitely one of the biggest challenges. Everybody has to be pretty adept at using a sextant and finding your way, and you're trying to figure out the pressure zones, you know, using barometers, and back to the old times.
And if speaking of attrition, we might just take a quick look, Shane, do a quick one-liner on each of the skippers here that are out, just to explain to people what's happened. So we started with 16. We're now, according to this, down to 1, 2, 3, 8, I think. But we know that 2 more are going to be retiring, Guy and Elliot. So take us through the first. Well, take us through Tapio.
Okay, so the first man, Tapio, he's from Finland, and Tapio unfortunately dramatically left the race because his boat sank, which is very unusual and took everyone by surprise. His boat, Asteria, he woke up to a loud bang, and when he basically sat up off his bed, his legs were up to his knees in water, and the boat was sinking rapidly, and it was very dramatic. But he got his he got his raft out, and he got his emergency kit, and he was into his raft, and it was very dramatic. I think we're going to cover it in another episode, because there's a lot of details in it which are quite unbelievable. But the short story is Tapio's boat sank, and there was a dramatic rescue operation which involved another skipper, Kirsten, and Tapio ended up being picked up by a passing ship, and he survived, thank God, but he's out of the race. So we'll come back to Tapio in another episode.
Cool.
For sure.
And Mark, I'll take the next couple. So Mark got to Lanzarote and for personal reasons retired. Ayrton made it as far as Cape Town, and there's a really interesting interview with Ayrton in Cape Town. It's a beautiful interview, to be honest, and it's totally unexpected. He felt that his journey was done. His journey was complete at Cape Town. He loved the boat. He loved what he had done, and he found some kind of deeper meaning, and that's sort of an inner search an inner journey that he was on, I think, and would highly recommend that people watch that interview. But he pulled out, and he felt his journey was complete. Pat, in fact, who Shane's going to talk about in a second, sailed Ayrton's boat back to the Canaries, and we must follow up with Pat and figure out exactly what happened. Over to you, Shane, with Pat.
Yeah, so Pat Lawless, obviously the only Irish entry in the GGR, and one of the reasons that I was attracted to it in the first place. Real character, Pat. Myself and Sean we're going to try and reach out to him ourselves, try and get him on one of the episodes. He's a furniture maker, real legend, real down to earth guy. But Pat was doing brilliantly, and he was up there competing. He was in the top 3 all the way down past South America, around Trinidad, and on his way to Cape Town. The smallest thing, a small bearing on his steering system, basically broke, and he couldn't repair it. But it was the smallest bearing on his Aries. It was his Aries wind vane, I think, wasn't it, Sean? Yeah. But it was the smallest thing, and Pat unfortunately had to retire when he got to Cape Town. But he ended up, like Sean was saying, bringing Ayrton's boat back up. But hopefully, we're hoping Pat maybe goes takes a run at the next GGR. But that's that story anyway. We'll come back to him as well on another episode for more detail.
Yeah, we haven't asked him, but we will. Guy then. So I'll just talk about Guy now. Guy ran aground in Fuerteventura, which is another really sad story. Now, thankfully, he's okay, and he's at the moment in the southeast of Fuerteventura, fixing his boat, with the view to maybe competing again. We're not quite sure. Another guy we would like to talk to, but there was some unfortunate circumstances around his grounding as well. We think he was asleep, but I think he was asleep at night, and just maybe wasn't where he thought he was going to be, and landed on the north shore of Fuerteventura. Also, some valuable equipment was looted from the boat, which is obviously shocking and compounds the disappointment. But he's actively working on his boat, and in recent updates and interviews that I've heard with him, he's been very positive. So that's definitely another story that's worth following up. Edward retired very early in the race. I think it was 3 or 4 days after leaving Les Sables, and he turned back, and I think it was for personal reasons, so he retired. Damien, Shane, give us an update on Damien.
Damien, he was another fierce contender, and he was really doing well. But unfortunately, he just after Cape Town, he had a problem with his steering on his boat, his steering system, and he attempted to repair it. And we all thought that it was a successful repair. I think it was in, was it in Simonstown? I think it was the same place where Elliot did a repair. And unfortunately, he just turned back. We all saw him on the tracker, and it was unfortunate because he's a terrific sailor, and we were excited to see him competing, but it was another self-steering problem that couldn't be repaired. So that was Damien out.
It's amazing how sometimes the tracker tells you in advance of news that's going to come. Yeah. You know, we knew in that case. We were texting, I think, on that day saying something's up. What is Damien up to? And he was going backwards. Clearly something wrong. Okay. And then Arnaud has also retired from the race. He had massive problem with barnacles. He also had quite a small boat. I think it was 32 foot. The other boats were 35, 36, most of them. And he was making really slow progress, and he was never going to make the Hobart Gate. So he would have had to pull out anyway when he got to Australia. But he also had some difficulty, or he had problems with his forestay, I think. So he couldn't really sail upwind. So he was hanging around in the middle of the Atlantic for a few weeks, and eventually had to, and couldn't go upwind. So he was, if any sort of system came in, that had any force of wind, he had to kind of go downwind. So he eventually started heading north towards St. Helena, and he was due to pull in there. I think he may have kept going towards the Caribbean at that point. At the moment, I'm not sure where he is, but he's officially retired from the race. So that's all the official retirees. Then we've talked about Guy already, being in Chichester class. So maybe just give us a couple of sentences on Elliot, Shane, and then if we've got time before we finish, we can talk about Elliot in a little bit more detail. But where is he off to at the moment?
So Elliot is on his way he's heading towards Perth in Australia. They reckon he's going to go to Fremantle in Australia. But Elliot he's sailing an old boat. It's a Gale Force 34, it's called. If anybody, I'm not a huge boat expert, but I'm starting to learn a lot more about the boats just from being a fan of the GGR. But Elliot's boat is quite old, and it took a good few knocks. And long story short, he has quite a damaged bowsprit, which is the front of the boat. It's in a bad way now. He tried to repair that, and I think he's operating on a jury rig, and he's he's got a deeply reefed mainsail. Actually, Sean, would you mind just explaining to people briefly what a jury rig system is and what a reefed mainsail would mean?
Yeah, like jury rig is kind of any sail plan or setup that you have on the boat that's temporary or a quick fix or a kind of something that will get you home. For example, the classic case is when you lose your mast. So, but it can actually technically apply to anything. He's, I think, lost his forestay, so he's using ropes. We never say ropes on a boat; we say lines. But or we say halyards. Everything on a boat that's a rope, as we would call on land, has a name. And in this case, he's using the rope that pulls up the spinnaker or the jib, and he's attaching that from the top of the mast to the front of the boat, essentially the bow of the boat, to add stability, because he's got a problem with his bowsprit. That's as we understand, as best we understand. But jury rig, yeah, a classic case would be if you lose your mast, and if you lose your mast, or it breaks. If your mast snaps at the top of the boat and it breaks and it's hanging over the side, you're never going to be able to get that back up. So what you usually do is, or what you nearly always do, is cut it loose. So you get a bolt cutters and you cut all the metal wires that hold it up and just get rid of it. Kick it off the side of the boat, get it away as quick as you can so that it doesn't punch a hole in the boat. If you're lucky enough, you'll have saved the boom or a spinnaker pole or some other metal object that you can use as kind of a small mast, and that's what we call like a jury rig. The rig essentially is the mast and all the wires that hold up the mast. Everything that allows you to put up sails on a boat is referred to as the rig. So everything that's above the deck level of the boat. So jury rig is like something that's kind of been created that kind of gets you home. And there was a famous case during the Vendée Globe, another Irishman, Endo Cunneen. I don't know if you know about this one, Shane, but in the southern Indian Ocean, he lost his mast, created a jury rig, and essentially hobbled on to Australia or to New Zealand, and managed to save himself. Incredible story as well. Wow. He went back the following year, I think, and finished it from where he had lost his mast in a different boat. He's another very interesting character, separate from the GGR, but a very interesting sailing story.
Is there a relationship between? Sorry, Sean. I'm just wondering. Yeah. Is there a relationship between? What's the connection between self-steering and if you put up a jury rig? Does it compromise your self-steering in any way if you're still solo-handed sailing and you're like Elliot if you're 700 miles from where you're trying to get to?
Again, no, theoretically it doesn't, unless it's been damaged, because that system isn't connected to the rig in that case of losing the mast. In Elliot's case as well, where he hasn't lost his mast, Elliot's case is a much less serious case, because he's got, if this is your mast here and this is the metal wire that joins the top of the mast to the front of the boat, and the boat's this way. I'll stop sharing the screen so people can actually see me. But if this is like the front of the boat is down here and the boat's going that way, I think he's got a problem with this wire, this bowsprit here. But he's another wire, if you can imagine. I need a biro, I need another hand. But there's another wire in here which joins a bit lower down to the boat. So there's two wires attached to the mast, one at the top and one lower down, and they're both attached to the deck. And that second one, called an inner forestay, gives you additional support. So he's actually in quite good shape. His steering system, which is controlled by a wind vane, is at the back of the boat, and that hasn't been damaged that we're aware of. So he's totally fine, and that means he can sail the boat without using his hands. Like it's an autopilot. It's a form of autopilot. So he
Brilliant.
just points the boat where he wants, and he can go down and adjust the sails, make his dinner, sleep, relax. And most of the sailors doing a round the world trip don't touch the actual helm unless they need to. And the helm being either a wheel or a tiller, which is like a stick that controls a rudder. And on most of these boats these boats are all from they're old classic boats modeled on boats from 1968. They don't necessarily have to be from 1968, but the designs have to be from around that time. I don't think any of them have a wheel. They all have a tiller, but they all have an autopilot.
Just while you're on that subject, I was listening to an interview with the race leader, Simon Kerwin, who we'll come back to in more detail in another episode. But just on the subject of the wheel, Simon said that he had a wheel removed from a boat and a tiller put in, because he said that if you're solo-handed sailing, the last thing you want to be is standing behind a wheel. Like that, it's you got to have a tiller for solo-handed sailing. But I just wanted to throw that in. Wow. He made that point.
As in, you a wheel is something that you should never need it, basically.
Yeah, you're stuck behind it as well. You know, you could be doing a lot more if you're just adjusting the tiller. But
that's interesting. I hadn't. So he had one and had it removed. That's interesting. Okay, cool. We might just share this tracker. So can you just tell us what the tracker is?
So there's a live tracker on the GGR site, which is fantastic, and Don McIntyre does updates on YouTube, and obviously we're following it, but you can follow it every day. You can log in, so you can check how fast someone is going and their position on the map, and you can introduce windy. And it's very addictive. If you're new to the race, it'll really get you excited, get you into it. There's large squares on the tracker which are exclusion zones, which Don introduced because it's very difficult to rescue someone when they're down below those zones. So it's more of a safety issue than anything. So the skippers have to avoid those large exclusion zones, but there's various points along the map that they have to go around, and there's a couple of film drops, which is another throwback to the original 60s race where sailors had to do film drops, and Don has kept those, which is brilliant. You know, it's a real retro throwback. And there's some amazing footage that they're releasing. Especially Kirsten had amazing footage. But it's Sean, if you want to talk through the tracker a little bit.
Yeah, like what I might just give I'll give a high level overview of everything on the tracker, what it is, why it's here, and then maybe we'll wrap it up for this week. And when we do the episode next week, you can give us a bit of an intro on the Elliot story, because I know that there's a lot of detail there, and like that's a really incredible story. He's a very interesting character. But I think we just want to give everybody a bit of a taste as to what's happening here. What the hell? I mean, you're looking at this screen. Myself and Shane know this inside out now. What you're seeing here, you're seeing a big giant orange square. You're seeing a landmass, and you're probably wondering what the hell is going on. So let's explain. And Shane, jump in and stop me if I'm rambling. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go through it bit by bit and keep it really simple. And you stop me, Shane, if there's any questions that you think people would like to know. So when you log into this tracker, and we will give a link in the description on the YouTube channel, it takes you to the leaders straight away. So here you see a little red boat. That's a representation, a pretty much near real-time representation of Simon Kerwin, and he's the current leader. We get updates every 4 hours on this website, and you can follow it on your laptop or you can follow it on your phone. It's brilliant, and like it's addictive. We find that we end up following this a lot. and particularly when there's interesting stuff happening and when there's people coming up to ports. This orange area is a no-go zone, as Shane said, for safety reasons. They don't want people to go down south. Why? Because when you're in the Southern Ocean, you're very isolated, and to rescue somebody in the Southern Ocean is a massive logistical challenge, massive and very dangerous, and takes a long time, and it can be very complicated, and that's the main reason for this. So in second place we have Abelash, and in third place Kirsten. Abelash is just overtaking Kirsten. Overtakings are quite rare, so it's been massive news, and we've been following it all the time. And then you have Michael Guggenberger gathering pace and catching up. Then this is New Zealand, by the way. This is Tasmania, Australia. Jeremy is approaching Hobart to do a film drop. In other words, he's sailed from Cape Town to Australia across the Southern Ocean, and he's going to drop in all his film of the onboard footage that he's caught and any letters that he has to his family, and they'll be posted off. He can't stop. He can anchor or pick up a mooring buoy and do some. That's not counted as a stop, but he cannot pull up to a marina and park the boat and get water and electricity and beer and all the rest of it. And he can't get any assistance. So it is, and remember, it's a solo non-stop race, but anchoring is allowed. Ian Herbert-Jones then is on his tail. And then a little bit back, we have Elliot, who is on his way to retire up here to Perth on the west coast of Australia. Sir Robin Knox-Johnson is the winner of the 1968 race. This is kind of like a yardstick to show where he would have been at the same time if he had started with the rest of the crew. So it's really nice to have Robin along with us as well. Also, you see Bernard Montessier is there as well. And the winner of the race 4 years ago, Jean-Luc, is there as well. Further back then we have Guy. Guy is dipped into the no-go zone. Doesn't really matter because we know he's out of the race anyway. So what happens is you get penalized if you end up in here. I think 3 hours for every hour that you're in here. So it doesn't really matter to him because he's in Chichester class. Tapio, that's just an old relic to where he was rescued. And then this is kind of where they've come from. You have the retirees, Damien, Arnaud, and this is kind of the route. So they started up here in Les Sables d'Olonne in France, across the Bay of Biscay, down through Lanzarote, Fuerteventura, Canary Islands, past Cape Verde, west coast of Brazil. They cut across a place called Trinidad here, basically turned the corner, down the South Atlantic, into Cape Town, another film drop in Cape Town, then Southern Ocean. And that's kind of the route. Very, very high level overview. So what we look at here regularly is things like wind. So you've got these features here. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. So you obviously see Australia. You can put on the wind. This is brilliant. So you've got different models. You've got this predict wind model, which is similar to the app. And you've got another model called Windy. I'll just put on the Windy model.
And Windy shows all the pressure zones, which is fantastic. So you can see if someone's about to have a massive storm coming, or if someone's about to hit a no wind zone. And obviously it's amazing for the GGR crew. So if there is any severe storms, Don can warn everybody. But it's brilliant for fans of the race just to be able to put the Windy over the tracker. Because you can we can do some predictions. Maybe we can do that on some of the next episodes. We can do some dead reckoning and try and make some predictions.
It's typical. It's like doing a demonstration or a presentation, Shane. Everything breaks when you're trying to do it, and for the first time ever, Windy has packed in for me. So I'll give it one more go, and let's see if I can get it going. Do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about Elliot, Shane, just while
Yeah.
I
So
get
while Sean is loading that up, Elliot Smith, he's the youngest participant in the race, and he's on his way to Australia to retire from the race. But he's been very entertaining. He's a real character, and like you, for anybody watching this podcast, we're going to go through the skippers over time, and some of them have amazing experience. Some of them are real legends of the seas, circumnavigators. But Elliot, he's only new to sailing. He only started sailing 4 years ago, and he's a real character. He's from Florida, and he basically got a job in San Francisco on charter boats, and he was, without any prior sailing knowledge, he ended up on these boats for 6 days a week for 2 years, and that's where he cut his cloth, and then he ended up sailing around the east coast of states and then island hopping in Bahamas. But fate would have it that he ended up in the GGR, and Don McIntyre has described him as the Motissier of this race, and we know that Bernard Motissier was the real romance story of the original race. So that's a real compliment for Elliot, you know. But he's a character. He's hilarious. I've listened to him on a few podcasts, including there's Paul Trammell, who's a friend of his. They're sailing buddies, and just his description of how he came into the sailing world and buying his first boat, which was a Pearson Triton, 28 foot. It's a fiberglass sloop, real old retro kind of boat, and just the way he described it and how he really wanted to, he just fell in love with the whole idea of sailing, and it's a great story. But the fact that he got this far is incredible, and like he's on his way home now. He's making a journey of 900 miles on a broken boat, and like that trip alone is more than some people will sail in their whole lives, you know, which is it's a brilliant story.
yeah. No, it's an amazing. He's an inspiring character, to be honest. He's 27, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like he's really young, and it's
So
for someone who's only sailing 4 years, like it's incredible. He's done a lifetime of, like, this is an amazing journey, and I think it's the beginning for him, not the end.
yeah,
Like
totally.
just before we wrap up, Shane, maybe just a word on Don, because we talk about Don a lot. Don McIntyre, he's the founder of the Golden Globe, of this iteration of the Golden Globe. He kind of mentioned him briefly at the beginning, but he's the chairman of the race, sets the rules. He's the main man essentially, and he's heavily involved himself. Does a daily update. Would highly recommend that people watch his daily update. His ones usually work. Mine didn't work today when I was going through the tracker. We'll get it working next week, because it is a key piece and it is great fun. And like, you learn a lot about weather. You can push the weather forward a day, 2 days, 3 days, and you can kind of guess what's going to happen to the fleet and who's going to gain and who's going to lose. It really is powerful technology, and it's absolutely fantastic. And Don does an update every single morning. So when you wake up, I know I certainly, with my coffee and my porridge, every morning I watch the tracker, and Don does a quick 10-minute update, and I would highly recommend that people get involved. Anything else, Shane?
No, I think that's a nice first episode. I think, just introduce everybody to it. We can get more into things as we move on, but definitely encourage people to check out Don's tracker, and we're going to do our own tracker updates as well.
Yeah, I guess, like, for us, we're fans of sailing. We're involved in sailing, but we really love this race, and we kind of want to get it out there to people about what this race is about. It really is an incredible physical challenge. It's an incredible psychological challenge, logistical, financial, everything. And we think it's a really amazing story, and we just want people to know what it's about.
For sure. Cool. Yeah. It's once you get into it, it's very exciting. It's one of the most exciting things I've ever followed.
We might be competing in it ourselves, Shane, in 4 years, 2 separate goals.
All
right. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. And if anybody's got any questions, folks, just fire us a comment or send us an email. We'll put all the contact details into the description. You can fire us a comment. It's probably the handiest way. And if you have questions, we'll try to answer those as best we can next week.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Cheers, folks. Talk to you later.
Thanks a million, folks.